I hope you guys thank you for being here, Lindsay and Zach. I hope you guys had a wonderful weekend. Mine kind of sucked. I had to finish some work and I averaged about 3 hours of sleep a night trying to get some windows done. And then I had to drive up to Salt Lake, Sunday, drop them off and come back yesterday, and I got home and got into bed at about 3 in the morning. So that was I mean, it's kinda nice to have a weekend like that every once in a while where you just get stuff done, but I don't know. I'm not 17 anymore. It's hard to recover from that now. Oh, well. How about your guys' weekends?
Um, just hung out with the horses that I take care of, and that was about it. Chill weekend.
That's cool. My daughters, when they were younger, they worked on a horse farm for a couple years, and that was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun seeing them, little teeny tiny 17-pound little girls, um, being confident around horses and appreciating them, and that was fun to see. That's cool.
It
How about
teaches
you,
you so
Zach?
much.
What's that, Lindsay?
Sorry, go ahead.
How about you, Zach? How was your weekend?
It was great. I worked a lot of the weekend and hiked around with my daughter on my available time and did a bunch of homework, but it was a good weekend.
All right, great. Excellent. Yeah, I wanted to right now, we have 6 small projects, and then we have a capstone project that's due at the end of the term, and I've been thinking about this for a while. I'm gonna, remove the 6th project, so everybody only has 5 projects to do, and, I'm gonna make that change. I wanted to announce it to everybody. I'm gonna send an email out about it as well. And I would really appreciate it if you guys, as you're going through the modules and stuff like that, if you see things where I've written 6 projects in a capstone, I'm gonna try to correct as much of that as I can, but if you guys see that I need to change it places in the syllabus, please let me know. In fact, I'm gonna go right now, go to modules, and go all the way down to the 6th research and discovery project. I'm gonna go ahead and let's see. See if I can remove it. I don't know if that's I'm this is kind of annoying. I wonder okay, hold on a sec. Okay, that's I'm not I'm gonna I'll remove it after we're done with the class tonight. And so you guys only have to do 5 projects and then the capstone. And, people have already started contacting me, emailing me about their final capstone project, and if you look at here on the final capstone project, you guys can see this page, right?
Yes.
Okay. This gives you the project guidelines and everything like that, and the project proposal is the thing that's due this week, and this is where you actually tell me what you're going to be doing for that 10 hours of work, and what it's basically just a short email directly to me saying, "Hey, this is what I would like to do for my final project." And I'm actually going to change this so it's not due October 26th. I'm going to change it so that it's due a week later. Um, and uh, because we're going to get rid of the 6th project, we're not going to worry about the 6th project at all. Um, so I'm going to just expand that a little bit. So, but the final capstone proposal is really important. You let me know what you want to do. We do a little bit of back and forth to make sure you have it at 10 hours of work, and then it's, when I say go ahead, you copy our email back and forth into a document and you submit that email chain back and forth. That has your proposal and then my go ahead. The reason I have to do that is I have had people turn in things that represented maybe 45 minutes of work and then get upset when they didn't get any points. And I've had people that spend a lot of time on something that is outside the scope of the class. The scope of this class is prehistory to 1350. And I've also had people who wanted to do the world, and they ended up doing, to get their 10 hours, they ended up doing a PowerPoint sharing their research, and then also a time lapse showing their discovery project aspect. So the PowerPoint took them 4 hours and the discovery project took them 6 hours. I've also had people do one painting that took them 12 hours to do. And so please make sure that you take care of this, submitting it. And I'm going to edit the due date right now so you guys can see it.
Also, I noticed yesterday I was having a hard time downloading the discussion because Canvas was down most of the day. So I'm not sure if anyone else has had that problem on the uploading it and discussion end of it, but for some reason the internet was down half the day yesterday.
Well, and that was true of different things over the weekend. Everything that a lot of applications that use AWS or Amazon Web Services had issues over the weekend from Friday through until last night. And so Canvas from several universities was giving people a hard time. And like on campus this morning, I found out that a watercolor class was canceled because Canvas was down all day yesterday for that part. So yeah, and it's, if you guys are concerned about turning stuff in or whatever, just email me and let me know. And it's not that big of a deal from my end, as long as you let me know. And this week too, everything is going to be turned in probably a day or two late. And I understand that because, like Zach just said, Canvas was down over the weekend. So that's totally fine. But yeah, thank you for bringing that up and saying something about that. So I am going to, as soon as we get off of this meeting, I am going to go ahead and make that change. And I want everybody to make sure that they understand we only have 5 projects plus the capstone project that's our final. Okay. So there's no tests in this class. All the tests in this class, all the quizzes are the weekly reflections, and all the tests are the actual projects that you do. So, instead of doing that, that's the assessment style I've chosen for this class. So, with those projects, the biggest issue people have had historically is making sure that it ties directly to the course material. And the course material for this class, 2710, is of course art and art history from prehistoric times up until the year 1350, which is the first half of the Gothic period in Europe. All right. Everybody got that? Well, everybody, I would say Lindsay and Zach.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, great. Now I'm gonna editorialize for just a minute here, and as we get into this week's module, one of the frustrations that I have is I really want art periods and art movements to start on a specific date and time and end on a specific date and time. So, for example, I want like Carolingian art to start on 9:30 in the morning on February 17th at the year 613, whatever. I want that. I one of the problems I have ongoing with art history is every time somebody comes up with a date, they find exceptions to that date before and after. Um, there's the art periods and art movements are generally defined more by trends than actual events. So we get an art movement, like Egyptian art period, excuse me, begins when people living in the larger area of Egypt start produce or there is surviving art that demonstrates the visual indicators that seems to link it to Egyptian art. And the oldest stuff that they find, that's evident, that marks the beginning of the Egyptian period. And of course, that is going to have to change as people find new stuff. As people realize, oh, that dating was totally wrong. It's actually 500 years older than that, or that dating was, the dating for the beginning of this is totally wrong because we found this whole cache of art that is even older than that, or people constantly are finding things to redefine that. So I hope people understand that history, particularly art history, because that's our subject, is not set in stone. It's a living thing. It breathes, it changes, it grows, our understanding expands, and so we don't have solid dates for a lot of stuff. Now, what we're going to be looking at in this module, I have images of material that is labeled as a lot more recent than 1350, and any of the stuff that you use that's closer to us than 1350, that's more recent than 1350, you can only use that if it's actually imagery that you found within the module, um, because that's what I've got to have. So I don't want anybody to find contemporary Nigerian stuff and try to do their weekly reflection on that because it won't count. But if you find something from this material that is more recent, as long as you say this, I found this image in the module itself, then we're okay. And it may just need to be a sentence before you launch into your critique of whatever the visual work is. Oh, and that reminded me of something else too. Um, when people to get full attendance points, and if you miss all the attendance points, your grade is going to be about a B, even if you do everything else perfect. So you really need to do your attendance points. The attendance points are 5 things that you learn from that video, that class session for that week. Period. It's not. I've had lots of people go through and try to make a summary of the entire module, and that's not what we're doing. Um, to get attendance points, what you do is write down, hey, yeah, today we talked about the FA Kingdom. We saw some really cool uh, surviving heads. There's a bronze head that was bought for $15 and wound up in the British Museum. And Andrew's wearing a shirt that looks like it's painted. Those kinds of things are fine because they demonstrate that you actually listened to the video, to the discussion. When you plug stuff into AI to do a summary of the module, that's a waste of your time because I'm not grading AI, I'm grading your work. And I won't grade AI unless it's something that you're doing specifically as one of your projects, and that's a totally different discussion. And attendance does not come from summaries of the module. It comes solely from 5 statements about what you saw in our discussion. And Lindsay and Zach, I know that you understand that, but with the 100 students that I have this semester, there's some confusion about that, and I just want it to be clear for everybody. So, and the editorialization comes from the continents. I'm going to pull up a map of the world here really quick. Okay. And so I'm going to try to share this and all right, here we go. Okay, can you guys see this? This map?
Yes.
Okay, it's a map of the Atlantic Ocean. Here we have the continent of Africa, and the United States can fit right in here. There's 54 countries in Africa. and there's more if you count like some of these islands. Um, what is interesting to me is that as old or as long as there has been a record of people, there have been documentation of colonization. Some countries that have stronger military presence or greater political power will colonize other countries around them, other nations around them. And what is interesting to me is typically when countries interact, they will begin, when they actually want to talk to each other instead of throw things at each other, they will begin on the fiction of an equal footing. There's almost always going to be somebody who thinks they're more powerful than the other person, but you don't know for sure. And so there's always this fiction of equal footing and I say fiction because both sides are really confident that they are stronger than the other, but so you look at European kingdoms, for example, when they interacted with other kingdoms, when Charlemagne was bringing Europe together, for example, he would treat with other kings and other rulers as them being heads of state because that's where they were, and he would make treaties with them. That is true of most countries. Now, what happened about 800 years ago, 700 years ago, at the close of the Crusades, is people from European countries that had travel technology, military technology, and communication technology, as they were exploring and going around and finding ways to get wealthy, they made the decision and I can't find any documentation for the decision, but the language shifted from treating other countries as nations, from treating other leaders of countries as executive leaders and calling them kings and queens, emperors and empresses. The language shifted to, instead of countries, they called them tribes, and instead of kings and queens, they called them chiefs. And what's fascinating is that that is true of as European nations started going and interacting and starting to colonize elements of the continent of Africa, the continent of South America, and the continent of North America. That's when the language shifted. So they were dealing with tribes of people in these three continents rather than countries of people, and they were dealing with tribal chiefs instead of heads of state, like equal heads of state, like kings and emperors. And so um, that tells me a little bit of something, which I think is really interesting in this more modern colonization politics, that it seems they didn't want to establish narratives with uh, countries even having the fiction of equality. They at the outset, colonizing powers were trying to make sure that everybody understood that the people they were colonizing were tribes, and they weren't dealing with equals, they were dealing with chiefs. And it really frustrates me because um, that kind of lack of respect carried through from everything from an acknowledgement of potential human rights all the way to history and religion. So when you come in as a colonizing power, and this is interesting because I'm not talking just about Europe, but other colonizing agents around the world have done similar things. But and the same is true of Australia too. The people that were indigenous to Australia, when British started colonizing it, they were treated with that same level of disrespect. It wasn't equal footing at all. And but if you're colonizing somebody else and you do not want them to have equal say in the economic distribution, it would seem to make sense that you would want them to have an awareness of their own history, an awareness of their own religion that supports your role in extracting resources from the areas that they control. Does that, and I'm trying really hard not to be political about this or judgmental. It just seems to be that that's how this kind of politics of interaction has displayed itself over the last 700 years about. And I think that that's really, I think that's really sad and telling. And it's not just European powers in Africa, North America, and South America. There is a history of this going back an awful long way. And just as an example is that when Rome was colonizing North Africa, Middle East, and Europe, they did a lot of the same kind of thing. The difference being is that as Rome got older, as they matured, they made sure that people in the colonized areas could go through the route of citizenship and become actual leaders of the civilization as well. And the best example of that is there was a guy born right around here in Africa in Libya. His wife was from Syria, right over here. His name was Severius Septimus. He was born around second, third century, right around there. And his family were citizens. And he became a Roman emperor and he founded London. So he was a Black African Roman emperor who founded London. And after that, um, it that kind of route for advancement and full participation in the government pretty much collapsed. And as a result, um, well, I don't know if it's as a result. I'm not going to say there's a causal connection, but it is interesting to me as Rome stopped that. You know, as people in Rome, you could only be a real Roman citizen and have full access to all the rights and privileges of Roman law if you were born in the right part of Italy. You know, and after they made that decision, that Rome started falling apart in the West. And I don't know if it's like I said, I don't know. I don't think we can say that there's a definite causal connection, but there was a shift in perspective. And it's just interesting. So 1,000 years later, you have Portugal and Spain and France and Belgium and England, all these people starting to go through and colonize Western Africa and um, Eastern South America and into North America. And as they do, what's fascinating to me is not only do they shift the language in treating with other countries into tribes and chiefs instead of nations and kings, the history is recorded in such a way that the reality of the cultures is sidestepped. And you know, it's spoken about in a very different way than how the people remember themselves, which I think is really telling. An example of this is the Ife were a kingdom in Nigeria, and they actually controlled and had not just controlled, but they also had an impact on this area of Africa. You know, just a really large area of Africa. And when some of these bronze heads were discovered, and I'm saying about 1930s is when a couple of them were discovered. A guy bought them off of somebody who found them they were redoing the foundation of a Nigerian prince's house. And one of these heads popped up. The guy bought it from whoever it was who found it for less than $5, sold it to the British Museum for $38. And the British Museum at that time said, oh yeah, this is just about, you know, a couple hundred years old. Well, it's actually, and you know, this one, it says it's their prints, 11th to 15th century AD. These bronze heads about every 15 years, the British Museum reassesses them and realizes they're even older than what they thought. So originally, when this was first discovered, it was probably only 200 years old. Now it's almost 1,000 years old. And there's several examples of this where when they're originally discovered by people who are active colonizers, it's assumed that either it's a misplaced artifact, like when the French found Zimbabwean rock art that kind of ended up inspiring in part Picasso's Cubism. That Zimbabwean rock art was assumed to have been made by Greeks who were colonizing instead of the native Zimbabweans. And it was assumed it was only 2,000 years old, but now people realize that it's more than like 20,000 years old. So do you see what I'm saying? It just, as the colonizing influence wanes, the true age is expanded, is what I'm saying. And that's, look at, I talk a lot about photorealism and how cultures around the planet have used photorealism when it fits within their schema of representation, their symbolism of the culture. The Ife kingdom heads from different elements of the Ife kingdom over the years, some of them are profoundly realistic. I mean, they look like Renaissance work, but a lot of them predate the Renaissance by over 1,000 years. And it is astounding to me. So we look at this, these ridge lines right here are actually scars, princes and queens of the Yoruba kingdoms, or I'm sorry, the Ife kingdoms. There are actually several cultures tied together. They would practice scarification, and there for a couple reasons. One is it identifies a person for their entire life as a royal, for one thing, but also imagine how this would feel as it healed. Imagine how these scars would feel as they healed. And notice how straight these are. The straighter and cleaner the scars are, the more self-control and discipline the person is demonstrating because they're not scratching or picking at these as they heal. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So somebody like this is going to be a prince who really has their stuff together because, their scars are straight. And whether or not the person actually looked exactly like this, I don't know. But seeing that these scars are straight, that is how whoever the artist is wanted. That's how they were intended to be remembered. So that's fine. But anyway, the UN says that there's 54 countries in Africa, and we also have Madagascar, and there's a couple islands as island nations as well that are sometimes counted, sometimes not. The United States fits into this top half right here. So it is big. In these 54 countries, there are about 3,000 languages that are currently being spoken. That's not historical. That's right now, 3,000 languages. And there is evidence of at least 14,000 modes of communication that have been developed in this continent. And that is just the history that survives, the evidence that survives, 14,000 languages in this continent. Adam's calendar is in South Africa, and Adam's calendar, some people date it to 75,000, others to 300,000 years ago. And there's a couple people that suggest it may be closer to the same age as those tools we talked about in China, which are almost 2 million years old. But it is evidence of things that are purposely stacked on top of each other outside of natural erosion, things that are placed in specific areas and relationships to each other that seem to have some sort of relationship to astronomical events. So it looks like it's actually a built structure, which I think is amazing. And with all the human beings from this part of Africa, the islands, all the way up to here, there is greater genetic diversity than all the rest of the human genome on the rest of the planet put together in this one continent. It is absolutely astounding. And there is evidence from everything from the invention of what we might recognize as medicine today to hot and cold running water 1,000 years before Europeans came up with those ideas. Right in this area right here, there's evidence of 2,000-year-old surgical implements used for cataract surgery that were found right in this area up here. 2,000 years old. They were doing cataract surgery that people survived. I think that's astounding. Anyways, so that's the whole continent, and everybody knows, of course, about Egypt and Nubia, but we're going to be looking specifically at the people that the Ife kingdoms influenced, which is an area right around here. And you kind of see why I've kind of localized it, because the visual imagery is relatively cohesive for this. But so the Ife kingdoms are based on a group of peoples that are called Yoruba. And I want to see. And Lindsay and Zach, as we are going along, please feel free to interject and ask questions. So when we're talking about words like Ife, that is one of the kingdoms related to the Yoruba. And this kind of relationship is the same as we talk about France being related to Europe. You know, France is part of Europe. Ife are kind of related to the larger umbrella of Yoruba. I don't know why it did that, but you know, these things are not new. A lot of them are about 1,000 years old, or maybe even older. But you look at these faces, and do they look pretty realistic? Do they to you
Yeah.
guys?
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing to me how naturalistic these are. And what is fascinating is these sculptures, a lot of energy is put into the face. And if you see one of these sculptures in real life, there's absolutely no question you'd be able to pick that person out of a crowd, you know, because they are so realistic. So I definitely watched this video about the history of the Yoruba people and some of their technology. One of the reasons why I picked this, and I hope it makes a lot of sense, is that, you know, if I go back to this previous screen, trying to get back there. Let's see if we can get there. Okay, here it is. I'm having some issues on Canvas today too, so hopefully it's not going to be too bad. Do you guys recognize any of your? Do you guys remember your history about what happened in this part of the world, starting about 500 years ago?
I don't.
This is marks the area where the majority of black slaves got onto the boats to come to the Americas. And you know, people were funneled through this area. And what's really, I mean, absolutely despicable and horrible, 12 million men, women, and children were treated worse than cattle, worse than chickens on ships to be brought as slaves over here to the Americas. But one of the reasons why I focused on the Yoruba influenced kingdoms is because those people passed through here, and a lot of their worldview um, was heavily influenced, not just from where they came from originally, you know, in other parts of the continent, but by passing through this area, a lot of the worldview and particularly spirituality was informed by the Yoruba kingdoms, the Yoruba influenced kingdoms that were prevalent here, and that's the main reason why I picked this particular area.
And this will sound silly. I just learned about it in American history. That was Spain that that trade was going around with through the Americas, or was it all countries involved in that?
Um, the ones that trafficked the most heavily, I thought were, the British and the Spanish, but there were
Spanish.
also Portuguese and, Belgians, France, um, Germans a little bit, but they were more south on the west coast of Africa, they were a lot more south, and then the Dutch as well, and that's at the very southern tip. But for and they didn't ship a lot of human beings around, but they did enslave people in the areas that they were in.
And they
But yeah,
would
I think
stop.
the
They
people,
would stop and get gold in boats in one part, and then stop there, and then go to the Americas. It was
yeah,
to
yeah,
learn about. Sorry to interrupt.
yeah. No, it's definitely one of the darkest periods of contemporary, more modern human history. Um, and I did want to show this a little bit. This gives a little bit of context. It's only about a 5-minute video. I'm gonna play it for just a little bit, and then I want to hear from you guys, if you can hear the sound and everything. Can you see this? It should
Yeah.
say Ife King, Ile Ife sculpture, 11th to 18th centuries. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay, we're gonna play it.
So we're looking at Africa
Okay, did you hear that? So we're looking at Africa?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
from the 11th to 18th centuries. We see the rise of monarchs in Africa, and we're talking about a much larger number. Not that there weren't monarchs before, but we tend to see more of them in this period. We see an increase in Christian and Muslim activity. And of course, we see the development of Portuguese European trade routes, primarily along the western coast of Africa. And as they do this, they're setting up these little trade colonies where the native peoples can bring goods in and trade with the Portuguese sailors. But we're starting with Ile Ife, which is the cradle of Yoruba civilization. And what we're going to look
Okay, I wanna just make sure that you guys understand. Yoruba is this area, and Ile Ife is part of the greater Yoruba culture. Does that make sense? And we're talking about Yoruba as if we're talking about European culture, there's lots of different communities within Europe. Just like that, we're talking Yoruba culture, there's lots of different communities within Yoruba. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thanks for the clarification.
So Ile Ife is one of these groups under the Yoruba umbrella.
which is the cradle of Yoruba civilization. And what we're going to look at is actually a depiction of the king. And we're looking at the piece on the right, the full-sized figure here. The piece on the left is here for detail, so you get a sense of the detail of the face. It's very similar between the two, but there are no detail images of the face of the piece that we're looking at. Now this is cast in zinc brass, so a high zinc content brass. And it's exceptional due to the naturalism in the face as well as the naturalism in the body itself. We'll get to the proportions in a minute. But the naturalism, the detail that goes into this looks like this could almost be a portrait of someone very specific. The hands and feet, the hardest parts of the body to depict in sculpture or two-dimensional art, drawing, and painting, are really well represented here. The face is very well represented, so very naturalistic. Now you're looking at it and saying, but the body's not proportional, and you would be correct. Usually the proper proportion of the human form is about 6.5 to 7 heads high. If you take the head of an average human and you stack it next to them, it should end up with the body plus head being 6.5 to 7 heads. In this case, it's much shorter than that. We're about 4 to 5 heads. That is shrinking the proportions. And so they're altering the form. And we can see that, for example, in the size of the feet. They're much larger than we might expect. In the proportion of the arms and hands. And again, the proportion of the head, which is unusually large compared to the rest of the body form. This is probably being done for stylistic reasons. The head in many of these West African traditions is the base of wisdom, destiny, and the soul. It's the focus of all it means to be alive for them, and therefore they're going to enlarge it. It's the most important part. We see the same thing in Western art all the time. Whatever's most important to an image might be enlarged. It may not be enlarged to this extent, but we still do the same thing. The costume and beads.
Can you think of other cultures that we've looked at where they did that?
Change the
One of the first,
proportions.
yeah, one of the first things that come to my mind is the Etruscans, Egyptians, Babylonians. Their eyes were bigger. Can you guys think of any other cultures that did the same kind of thing?
Mesopotamia was big on the eyes, and like a lot of the Iranian, like old Iran artworks.
Yeah, definitely. And then the Byzantine stuff, the bodies were really tall and their eyes were big too. So it's not because people don't know any better, it's because stylistically that's what's important to the culture. And I think it makes sense that if the head is the seat of wisdom, thinking, soul, that it feels very consistent that that would be larger. You know, just like Mesopotamia, the eyes were connected with um, the soul, you know, and the eyes were really important. Of course, they're going to be bigger too. And a stylistic decision to kind of underscore what's important to the culture that's producing the people of the artwork.
Indicate a sacred ruler. So someone with some divine power behind them, not someone who is simply king on a political basis. And when we look at the detail, the face is covered in these stripes. That is stylization. That is giving us a sense of someone who is sacred as opposed to a portrait of an average person. We're always doing this in art. We're always looking at images of someone important, and the artist needs to show that this is not the average person, that this is someone unusual, someone very different. So we see the striping, for example, on the face. The crown helps as well, but of course anyone can put on that crown. So they're trying to set this person apart. It's no different than when we see prehistoric depictions of gods and they have animal heads, or priests who have godlike features. They're doing exactly the same thing here with the ruler. What makes this impressive is in the 11th or 12th century, if we compare this to something we would see in Europe, this would arguably be a far more naturalistic sculpture than what we would see in Europe at the time. However, in Asia, you would see something very similar, something very, very naturalistic, especially in China and Japan at the time. So it does fit into this larger worldview of art.
So let's see. I'm going to get the clean. All right. So I wanted to share that with you so that you could kind of see um, a little bit of the background. And I like these maps too because they kind of show a little bit more about the continent, how many different countries there are, and stuff like that. And again, the Yoruba kingdoms are an area from about right here to about right here. You know, it's this whole area. Ile Ife is right around here. So it's in comparison, we're looking at the city of Harappa compared to the Harappan civilization that covered a lot of Pakistan and Western India. You know, so it's that kind of relationship of instance to culture. You know, the specifics to the overall culture. But it is fascinating to me that the body of the king would be so tiny compared to the head, and it's interesting to me that the parts that we typically think are the most difficult to portray are the ones where so much energy is given to get them right, and I think that that's pretty amazing. And I want to open this one up. We're not going to listen to it, but I want to see if we can find a couple really good images here. All right, can you see these stripes here on this face?
Yes.
All right, now, if we, understanding what scarification is, and that the straighter and cleaner the scars, the more self-control, more self-discipline the ruler has, the more clear thinking they are. This applies to men and women. The reason why I think a lot of these are naturalist depictions of the actual ruler is because of a couple articles that I've read last year from art historians that are from Nigeria, where they're talking about the history of scarification in Yoruba, what it meant, and how even more contemporary rulers that were even more contemporary to our, today's time had these kinds of lines scarred on their face. And that's why I think it's not just stylistic. It might very well be, but I don't think it's just stylistic all the time. And then I was trying to find another image to show you, but on some of the images you'll see little dots, little holes, like right around here and along the forehead. What do you think the holes are? When we see those?
Um, I would say piercings. I know that's been practiced, but I actually have a question on the scarification, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, do you think it was like a coming of age thing, or what was like the ceremonial rite behind that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, and, scarification in the cultures that still practice scarification now, it is a coming of age thing. It is validation of adulthood because, if you think about it, the conscious choice to do that, participate it, and then allow, the conscious choice to allow those scars to heal straight, um, is really a mark of intense self-discipline. So it is a coming of age, and I would think that with the ruling families, especially if they have this idea of the divine right of kings that we saw in China and so many other cultures, um, the more intense scarring would demonstrate their capacity for self-control and leadership in addition to coming of age and becoming an adult. So the more intense scarring would show that you are um, intended to be a ruler. And so, yeah, I think it definitely was because in today's cultures that practice it, it is. That's the primary reason I think because historic it is still practiced today. Now, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, I am kind of clicking through things a little bit. Okay, so we talk about the Ife is the contemporary name given to this group. Yoruba is the umbrella term. And then each of these, Nok, Igbo Ukwu, Benin, and Ife, each of them kind of mark a little bit more contemporary bookended culture. And these dates are dates that I found in various places from the most recent scholarly material done on these cultures from by people that are academically trained but have their roots in these areas. And I think, and it may be a false assumption on my part, But I'm thinking when it's your own culture that is examined, you're going to have a vested interest in finding out what's really going on more than if somebody on another continent is looking at your culture. And that's and I don't know how real or true that is, but that was the rationale behind it, the justification for this for me. And it's interesting because these dates are generally going to be quite a bit older than the archaeologists that are visiting from the cultures that colonized them. So I'm trying really hard not to be political. It just seems to be that is the my observation of the perspectives. And I don't know exactly why that is the case. Now, so we looked at those heads that were really photorealistic. Ile some of those bronze heads are 1,000 years old or older, and they look very naturalistic. And here we are looking at the Nok culture, and I'm gonna instead I'd like you to watch those videos when you can. Now, the Nok culture, instead of using bronze or high zinc content brass, they use terracotta and wood a lot. And the wood doesn't survive nearly as well as the clay does. But this is where I start having some of the problem. And there is some beautiful ironwork. There's also some uh, relief copper work that comes from this culture. Um, one of the issues that I have with this is um, again, a lot of this when you look at like Central America, South America, Mississippian cultures in North America, look at a lot of cultures in Africa, a lot of this stuff when it's found by people that are desperately poor or the relic hunters, and a lot of this stuff is taken out of context and sold on the black market. So it is very difficult to have real consistent um, uh, dating, a real consistent collection of actual artifacts. And so some of the images that I show you throughout this module is a lot more contemporary stuff outside, more recent than the scope of our class, but they seem to be consistent with what survives from earlier time periods. And so that's why I've retained that imagery. So this is the knot culture. And looking at this, what are some of the things that you notice right off the bat of these people that are portrayed here? One of the things that I see is we have large human forms and little teeny tiny person forms. We also see this in other cultures. It's called uh, hierarchical perspective, where it seems consistent with the idea that the larger human beings are portrayed as being larger because they have a greater social standing than the smaller human beings. And sometimes the smaller human beings are going to be children. But when we saw, do you remember when we looked at the standard of let's see, I'm going to try to pull that up really quick. Okay. I'm going to share this tab really quick. Okay. Now here's on the left is the king. Can you guys see this? It says on the standard of
Yes.
image. Okay. On the left, we have the king. In the middle, we have court officials that look like they might also be serving him. On the right is most likely somebody like a prince. The size difference, obviously, if this was a normal size human being in the middle, these two guys, say 5.5 feet tall, the person in the floral dress, who's the king, would be closer to about 9 feet tall. And most commonly, it's the idea that's accepted is that this demonstrates that the larger figure has a higher social standing than the smaller figures. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it
So
does.
okay, so if he's actually 5.5 feet tall, this person is not necessarily a child. I don't think they would be a child because notice that he's wearing a feather dress too, which means that the social standing is similar to this because they're wearing similar clothes, except this guy's bigger because he probably is of more importance, and this guy's a lot bigger because he's the king.
Yes, we saw similar stuff in Mesopotamian art and Greek art as well.
Right, exactly, exactly. So, and now I've gotten back to the terracotta bas relief knock culture. Some of the things that distinguish the knot culture from the Ile Ife stuff, for example, is that this is not, the faces are not necessarily photorealistic. It's interesting to me that the eyes are much bigger, the chins are much more pointed, the eyebrows are pronounced. Notice how flat, I mean, the nose, the bridge of the nose is missing entirely, and you have the bottom part of the nose right above the lips. So the features are distorted. And you're looking around, it looks like there is a male in the center and a female figure on either side. And the only reason I'm guessing that is because the female figures have anatomical markers demonstrating traditional femininity. That is, they have breasts. And this person in the middle does not. And if you look really closely right here, do you see this textured ridge coming down right here?
Looks like
His beard.
Yeah, and notice her chin right here is smooth. Her chin is smooth, and he does not have the breasts like these two. So that's why I'm thinking, because he has anatomical markers that demonstrate masculinity or traditional gendered male. That's why I'm thinking this is a man and these are women. So, and notice how pointed that chin is. Again, they know what a real person looks like. So the decision is made by the artist stylistically. This is what's important to the portrayal. And you can see that even though these are separated by a couple hundred years, stylistically it's very similar. You have pronounced chin, large eyes, and the bridge of the nose, you can see it here and you can see it here, but we still have those very defined eyebrows. And you have, again, that distortion of large eyes and pronounced chin, which is really interesting to me. So, and I'm just gonna, we only have another 25 minutes. So I'm gonna go through this a little bit quickly. I don't expect everybody to watch every single one of these videos, but I do want you to at least check out some of the artwork and at least watch one or two of the videos for each of them. Let's see. Now, the Igbo Okwu, they're a little bit more recent than the Nok culture. And what's fascinating to me, the more recent they are, there's more artifacts for the most part that are surviving. And in this case, this is a watercolor of artifacts that were found. And then this gives a little bit of a detail on some of the findings. And this is 1959, so very, very recent. But what is fascinating to me is as we come closer to today, the date of the artifacts that were found keep getting pushed back in time. And I think it's because people are more comfortable today accepting the fact that our ancestors were really smart going way back into history. That seems to make sense to me that it's okay now for these cultures to be older and older. And when they were first found, we're still coming off of colonialism. We're still coming off of um, perhaps some of these people may have felt uncomfortable with the idea that these people that were being colonized were just as advanced or had just as much of a weight of cultural history as they did, and maybe that informs. I'm not going to say that that's what informed the change in dates, but it is interesting as science technology for dating has increased, as well as people are more comfortable with accepting that our ancestors are just as smart as us, that the dates get pushed back. And I think that's fascinating. Now, looking at this, this is really an interesting pot to me. What other this is a bronze pot vessel. What other culture can you think of that we've seen that produced stuff that kind of is reminiscent of this? Look at the detail.
I'm thinking of the red pot that was the red clay shining through the black. What was that? Greeks again?
Greece did that. Yeah. Any other cultures? Excellent. Yeah. Any other cultures that you can think of? One of the ones that came to my mind was that the Qin, that the Han bronzes. It was very stylistically, it was very different, but consider the fact that this is all cast, and this netting with the knots, this is cast metal. It's not actually tied. So there's a lot of, what's that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I have a question.
Yeah.
How would have they accomplished something like this? Because you can almost see like the movement in the rope too. Like if you were to tie a rope around that pot, I feel like it would look like that.
It is astounding evidence of our observation. These people knew very much what they were doing. And most of these sculptures, most of the metal sculptures like this are made with lost wax casting, where they would take typically something like along the lines of beeswax, which has a really low melting point. They would sculpt the whole thing out of beeswax. And then one of the videos I provide in this module even shows the process of how they would pack the wax with clay as tight as possible, then melt that wax out and pour molten metal into the area where the wax was. And then once that cools down, the metal is pretty sturdy, and you can knock the clay out. And that process is called chasing, but it makes it so you get this insane level of detail. I mean, look at that. Each of these balls is about the size of the head of a pin. It's astounding to me. And this is at least 1,000 years old. This one right here makes me think a lot of those Han era bronzes. So this is about 1,200 years after the Han Dynasty bronzes that we saw. But I mean, that is an awful lot of stuff going on. These artists, it demonstrates to me that the artists were confident enough in what they were doing that they just took it as far as they could. Absolutely beautiful work. Really amazing stuff. So definitely check this out. That's an article. And then also there's a few videos. And we're not going to watch this video, but I do want to. This is 3 minutes long. Maybe we can watch it. I don't. Oh, no, we don't have a lot of time. But this shows some other examples of artwork, masks and portraits of people. And I think that you can kind of see on this, something like this, there is a little bit more evidence of that the knot culture face, where we have the pronounced eyebrows, the really large eyes, and the pointy nose in some cases, and the overall face structure. But then also Ile Ife, you have these ridges in this bronze that are reminiscent of the scarification. Can you guys see this?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. And then this, we have the incredible detail in the pot. And if I'm pretty sure that I do have a lost wax casting video that in one of these module elements, and that kind of shows how they would do this. but a lot, just an astounding level of detail. This is hard to do today, and these guys were doing it 1,000 years ago.
I'm glad Lindsay asked how you would do that because I thought they just dipped a rope in some bronze or something. I couldn't imagine it myself.
Yeah, and it's there's a number of different ways to do it, but the most common was lost wax with clay. The Japanese, about 2,000 years ago, developed a way of doing it with cuttle bones. Cuttle bones from a cuttlefish uh, are easy to carve relatively. You get 2 of them, and you can make a coin cast that's reusable with 2 cuttlefish bones, where you carve opposite faces of a coin in both of them, tie them together, and then pour the molten metal into it, and that's how they would make coins. But most other cultures, like Harappans, we looked at, did lost wax. Romans, Greeks did lost wax casting. Carolingian lost wax, and then the Yoruba kingdoms did lost wax as well. And here, this is the Benin. Statue of Liberty. That's what their version of the Statue of Liberty, the contemporary country. And this is relatively recent. I think it's only maybe 15, 20 years old. But, and I just do that to kind of give you a little bit of background. And then this shows some of the sculptures. And notice that Benin is 900 to 1500. So it's a little bit more contemporary. Our class cuts off at 1350, but because I have this labeled in the module, we're still good. So, if you want to do that. Now, this one, okay, he's kind of demonstrating the lost wax. This is about 9 minutes long. And so we're not going to watch the whole thing. But this person is doing it, doing the metal casting in the same way it's been done for 2,000 years for the Yorubas. And so definitely, Lindsay, watch this video itself, and it takes you through the whole process. And it shows several different masks and different things like this. And again, I'm frustrated with the dates because a lot of these bronzes, the historical bronzes were labeled only being made in the 19th century when they were first discovered, but they've been shown since then to be at least 500, 600 years older. And this guy is making something stylistically that matches those bronzes, but he's doing it as kind of a historical celebration of his culture's history, and he's doing it with the techniques that they used originally. And notice with the Benin, what do you notice about this face compared to what we saw with both the Nok and the Igbe culture?
Back to more photorealistic.
Yeah, it's interesting, but with some of like the collars and the headpieces and things like that, the hairstyles, there is still a very significant cultural connection, I think, and I think you can kind of tell, or at least I can see that a lot of these are very connected. These cultures are connected to each other. So this is very contemporary. This stuff is only a couple years old, but he is copying stuff that is historical that goes back centuries. And he goes through the whole process. So making it out of wax, packing it with clay. This is that same figure, and you can tell it's just a big lump of clay because he packs it with clay until he only has a little bit of wax showing. Then when he fires it, all the wax burns out, and that cavity that's left, he can pour the bronze in. So Lindsay, definitely watch this. I taught bronze casting at BYU for a number of years, and this process is thousands of years old. Okay, so here it's all cast, and now he's breaking the clay away. And this process of breaking all the clay away and cleaning it up is called chasing. And you can see the relationship of this to that sculpture out of wax that he was showing. Right here. So definitely take the time to watch this video, and it just goes through the whole process. And then this one I really love too, because this talks about some of the more recent artwork, but these are plaques that were done. And some of these plaques are carved, some of them are embossed, and some of them are, and there are elements that are cast as well. And you can see that there's the collar piece. There's different elements like this, the snakes, and in most cultures around the planet, actually these are fish. Fish are used as signs of abundance, longevity, wisdom, those kinds of things. Why do you think he's holding a lion in either hand? What could that represent?
Strength.
Yeah, definitely. And what do you remember about that first head that we looked at, and the nodule and stuff? To me, this looks like that nodule that was in those Ile Ife crowns.
Yeah.
We have that, and then we
It's like
have the
show
collar.
spirituality.
Yeah, and the connection to divine wisdom, perhaps, or divinely inspired wisdom. So yeah, here's a little bit better picture. And I just think it's really amazing to me how much can be communicated when we look at some of these things. So the Ife, the Benin was 900 to 1500. Ife, I should probably switch the relationship of those, but because goes back a little bit older. Again, these are all under the Yoruba umbrella. But some of these will give you a little bit more information about the history of these and how the dates did change. And some of these were not just bronze like this, but also terracotta. And this is one of my second wife looked very much like her. Just absolutely, absolutely beautiful, beautiful person. And I look at that image. My inclination is that this was probably actual scarification. This is probably very realistic. But in any case, just that cerebral, spiritual repose, I think, is astounding in the face. And this, so this predates the Benin a little bit, and then also covers the same kind of period. This is where we're also getting that more of that photorealism as well, because that's important to the people that made these things. And I want to pull out a couple of these articles. I include the articles because they will have photos of a lot of stuff. And I thought this was supposed to have photos in it, but it looks like they got rid of it. That is disappointing. Okay. Okay, so here's a couple examples of different bronze heads. And I think that this spans a period of about 100 years or so. What do you see that's consistent among these, and what do you see that is different?
We have the same headdresses, except it looks like the first head is a woman.
I kind of see that too. Yeah.
And hers is shorter. I don't know if that says something, but
Well, and these might also have reference to the lingam as well. Like we're looking at the architecture in India having to do, I wonder if this is a phallic symbol as well. So it's not just a demonstration of his divine wisdom, but also that he represents the abundant masculinity idea, the divine masculine. And then she becomes uh, an, an image that's associated, or her imagery is associated more with the divine feminine. I wonder if that is part of the case, but it does seem to me, this head though, it could be in between. I see a little bit of femininity in this face as well. But do you, Lindsay?
I'm kind of inclined to agree with your phallic and masculine
Okay.
representing idea with the headdress.
Okay. Because
So
it
that may
seems,
be like a symbolization of their gender.
yeah, that 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 seems to be consistent. But this definitely, she looks like a woman, and this guy, close up, these both look like men. So yeah, I'm wondering. But notice these little dots here. When you see it in this kind of a context, what I see is, I wonder if they use like horsehair or something, or even um, yeah, something like that, and mounted it in so you could see something like a beard. Does that make sense? Do you think that that might be consistent?
Yeah. I mean, I'd
But
believe it because the horsehair would decompose over time. So,
Yeah, it would be completely gone. And I'm thinking, with these lines being so consistent, I'm inclined to believe that that's a representation of scarification as opposed to actual scarification. So I imagine that these people, like that first head we looked at, where the parallel scars were about 3/4 of an inch apart from each other, I think that that was probably more consistent with actual scarification and an actual portrait. And this, I think, might be stylistically representing that kind of thing. Because but that's just supposition on my part. And then, the Benin, what I like about this is that you can see that FA head, one of those FA heads that's photorealistic. The Benin, the Benin seems to be a real stylistic bridge between this and those earlier cultures. I don't know if it is or not, but it feels it stylistically, it seems like that. Now, the Smart History article, I really like this one because they have more examples of the terracotta style heads. And I love that. And with these lines, these vertical lines being so consistent among them all, I'm thinking, and this spans a period of about 400 years at least, I'm thinking that stylistically probably represents the scarification that they actually had, instead of being a portrait of the scarification. I'm sorry, my dog is trying to get on top of my lap while I'm teaching today. And I'm annoying. Okay, and this
kind
is
of
this
dog?
area.
What
What's
kind
that?
of dog do you have?
She is an Airedale Terrier. She's about 4.5 years old, and she has perpetually existed in a state where she believes herself to be a human 3-year-old. And it's like there's no point in training her because she doesn't understand why you're wasting your time. She'll do what she wants anyway.
I
So
have
it's
a
kind of,
cat that's got a similar attitude.
I think it's pretty funny. She is a sweetheart, but she has very little patience for me. She loves my wife, and she will do anything for her, and she will ignore me completely. Now, here we see those beard holes again, and that's, I think you're right. I think hair decomposed out of them, because a lot of these were found in the ground under sites that historically were where palaces were built. So I'm thinking that in the ground, the dirt, the hair probably did decompose. That seems to make sense to me. So this article is a pretty good one, talking a little bit more about the history. But I just, this kind of thing is exciting to me because some of these bronze heads, I read an article last year where it talked about, they could have predated the Renaissance by 1,000 years. And I think that that is astounding. So I want to show you some of these really amazing things. This is Benin and Ife. This is the Benin, and you see the collar and the crown here in this. And this to me looks like a king with a queen on either side. And the only reason I think of that because in other views you can see the gender indicators. Here's it looks to me like a king with maybe a prince or something, or maybe, and I'm wondering, and I'm thinking that too because we have these pillars right here on the top, kind of reminiscent of the the knowledge bumps for the Southeast Asia. This is another beautiful one.
Okay.
What is really interesting to me too is a lot of the time when we look at these things, some of these faces I'm thinking if you saw this person walking along, you'd be able to recognize them from this sculpture just because they are so precise. And I love this. We see those little holes right here, right around here. I'm thinking this is one of the reasons why I think those holes represent where hair was put, because it kind of makes sense. You put long horsehair strands here, and then you have the comb over going back, and then you have the beard coming right around here. That seems to make sense to me. I
So,
just think,
oh, sorry.
go ahead.
I was gonna say, you pointed out the image just now of a man you believe to be a king, and then two women on either side. And we saw that same imagery, I think you said, in the Nok culture of a man and two women. So do you think it's possible that they practiced polymarriage?
Well, there is a lot of historical evidence of polyamory in many different cultures. And for the Yoruba, polyamory is where you have multiple spouses of both genders. And there are many cultures around Nigeria. I'll also talk a little bit about the Orishas, but that's something else. But there is a lot of example of treaties being cemented and families united because the male figure marries multiple women. And in this case, the only reason I think that now you see that the pillars on the top of the head, so these could be princes as well. They don't have female gender indicators on their chest, but they're holding his hands. And that's why I'm wondering if maybe these are not his wives, but historically the kings of Yoruba did have multiple spouses. And you see that in many cases. There are other kingdoms where the women had multiple husbands. And, and marriages are a way of cementing family or treaty relationships through family relationships, because the children that came have a pull from every family involved in within that larger umbrella marriage. So ideas of polyamory, ideas of polygamy, of polyandry, they are not a weird thing for a lot of cultures. Even in Europe, until about 400, 500 years ago, polyandry, polygamy, that was not an entirely unusual thing. And so, yeah, the short answer to your question was yes. In a long and roundabout way. Now, these videos, I'm going to see if I can find replacement ones for them. I don't know why they're offline, but there's a lot of material to get through in that one teeny tiny area of the giant continent of Africa. And so just go through as much as you can looking at these things. And it is just really amazing. But in the very first section of the module, I do talk about the orishas. The orishas are the most recent thing I read, there were well over 120, but the orishas represent the ideas of deity facets from the Yoruba cultures, and they are gods that have aspects that control everything from weather and water to childbirth and protection in battle. Just like every other culture. The reason why they're important, though, is the Orisha Orisha traditions were taught to a lot of the people that lived in that area and went through as victims of the slave trade. And coming to the Americas, the ones that were influenced by Catholicism, that became the root of actual voodoo. And I'm talking about voodoo as a religion, not the silliness that's in movies. And the cultures that the slaves that were bought and sold under the umbrella of Protestant or Reformed Catholic, the Protestant faith, that became hoodoo. And it's, because it was a fusion of the Orisha religion, spirituality with these different versions of Christianity as the people came over. And so that's why, and it was, I just put it in there. But also when you see some of the things that they have, some of the animals that they're holding, some of the aspects that they have, similar to what we saw with images of saints, those aspects are tied directly to the Orisha culture as well. So holding a lion represents not just that the person is powerful in battle, but also that he is he's under the patronage of I think his name is Ora, who is the it's kind of like the analog of Odin in the Orisha spirituality. So, so it's just interesting to see those kinds of things. So at the very beginning of this module, and I'm sorry I am going over a minute or two, but I'm getting back here. If you look right here to the Ife Kingdom, I do talk a little bit about the Orishas, I think. No, not near the Yoruba, sorry. So, and this gives you a little bit of insight into the spiritual umbrella that the kingdoms under the Yoruba umbrella kind of embraced. And so I'm sorry if that was confusing. Was that too confusing?
No, not at all.
Okay. Because the Orishas are the gods and goddesses, essentially, of the Yoruba cultures. So, are any questions or last observations before we close tonight?
No, thanks for hooking us up on 5 assignments instead of 6. It seems like we could put more efforts into our final that way.
Okay, good. I'm glad you pointed that out because I want everybody to remember that we're only doing 5 projects instead of 6, and then plus the last capstone project. And so it'll be 6 final projects instead of the 7 that originally had done. So I will, when we get off this call, I will make that change. And if you guys see any discrepancies as you read through the modules, please remind me so I can go back and edit it out. All right?
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Lindsay, for
you.
being here tonight. And thank you for everybody who is listening in later. And I hope you guys all have an absolutely wonderful week and weekend. And I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday.
You too, Andrew.
Awesome.
All right. We'll see you guys.
Toodles.